They said it couldn't be done. A merchant ship with a wooden deck bolted on top. Flying planes off a vessel that rolled like a barrel in open water. Hunting submarines from something the Navy's own admirals called a floating death trap. They were wrong. 30 degrees north. 42 degrees west. Middle of the Atlantic Ocean. May 22, 1943. The water stretches gray and endless in every direction. Cold. Empty. Unforgiving. Lieutenant Commander William Drain banks his Grumman Avenger hard to starboard. His eyes lock onto something dark cutting through the surface below. A German U-boat. U-569. And she's starting her dive. Spray erupts from her ballast tanks. White foam boiling as compressed air screams into the diving chambers. The submarine's bow tilts down. Her conning tower starts to disappear beneath the waves. Drain has 90 seconds. Maybe less. Too early with the depth charges and they'll miss. Too late, and his own plane gets caught in the blast. He drops from 600 feet to 300. The Avenger's engine roars. His radio man calls out ranges. Behind him, the turret gunner trains his weapon on the German deck crew scrambling to man their gun. The math has to be perfect. Drain releases. 2 depth charges tumble from the bomb bay. They hit the water 15 feet behind the conning tower. For 4 seconds, nothing. Just the sound of his engine climbing away. Then the ocean erupts. Twin geysers of white water punch skyward. 450 pounds of Torpex explosive detonating at 100 feet depth. The shock wave slams into the submarine like an invisible fist. Her stern lifts out of the water. Metal screams. Internal compartments rupture. Oil begins spreading across the surface in a dark, widening slick. Drain circles overhead. Watching. Waiting. German sailors pour from the conning tower hatch. Scrambling. Desperate. The submarine is finished. Her pressure hull has been compromised. She can't dive again. Her commander knows it. There's only one decision left. Abandon ship. 47 German submariners float in their life vests moments later, watching their vessel settle stern first into 3,000 feet of Atlantic water. 25 will be pulled from the sea by Canadian destroyer HMCS St. Laurent. 21 are already gone, dead in the attack or dragged down with their boat. This kill marks something the United States Navy never saw coming. The aircraft that just ended U-569 flew from USS Bogue, an escort carrier, a ship that Navy leadership had called impractical just 3 years earlier. Too slow, too vulnerable, too small to matter in modern naval warfare. Yet this ungainly vessel, converted from a merchant hull in less than 8 months, just demonstrated a capability that will transform the entire Battle of the Atlantic. Let me take you back. March 1943. The German U-boats are winning. And they're not just winning. They're dominating. In the first 20 days of March alone, Admiral Karl Donitz's submarines sink 82 merchant ships. 476,000 tons sent to the bottom. The convoy battles around HX-229 and SC-122 destroy 22 ships in 4 days. British Admiral reports are blunt. Germany has never come closer to severing the Atlantic lifeline. The one connecting North America to Britain. The one keeping the war alive. By May 1943, German U-boats reached the peak of their power. 116 submarines prowling the Atlantic shipping lanes. Donitz has assembled wolf packs of unprecedented size. They're sinking Allied ships faster than shipyards can replace them. And then there's the gap. The Mid-Atlantic Gap. That vast stretch of ocean beyond the range of land-based aircraft. 700 miles of empty water where convoys sail without air cover. U-boat commanders call it the Black Pit. Here, submarines can surface freely. Recharge batteries. Attack with near impunity. It's a killing ground. Into this crisis sails a weapon that Navy brass fought against building. December 1940. The escort carrier program begins against the explicit opposition of the Chief of Naval Operations. Admiral Harold Stark and Navy Secretary Frank Knox killed the initial proposal. Their argument? Technological advances have made such vessels obsolete before they're even built. Secretary Knox writes to the Maritime Commission, "A converted merchant vessel can no longer make a satisfactory aircraft carrier. Small carriers, they insist, will be death traps. Too slow to escape enemy warships. Too lightly armed to defend themselves. Too small to carry enough aircraft to be useful." And the admirals have logic on their side. Modern carrier doctrine emphasizes speed and striking power. Fleet carriers can launch massive airstrikes, then steam away at 30 knots before enemy surface forces can engage. They carry enough fighters to defend themselves. They have armor to survive bomb hits. Escort carriers will have none of these advantages. They'll lumber along at barely 16 knots. They'll carry perhaps 24 aircraft. They'll have no armor protection. Any enemy cruiser could overtake and destroy them. President Franklin Roosevelt overrules them all. December 21, 1940. Roosevelt sends a memo through Captain Daniel Callahan ordering an emergency program to convert merchant ships into carriers for anti-submarine warfare. The president grasps what the professional naval officers cannot see. The Battle of the Atlantic isn't being fought by fleet carriers against enemy fleets. It's being fought by submarines against merchant ships. The threat comes from below the surface, not from enemy warships or aircraft. What's needed isn't striking power, but presence. Not speed, but persistence. Not massive air wings, but continuous coverage. A small carrier moving at 16 knots with 24 aircraft can patrol an area for weeks. A fleet carrier moving at 30 knots with 90 aircraft will burn through fuel stocks in days. The mathematics favors slow, small, cheap carriers built in quantity over fast, large, expensive carriers built in limited numbers. The first result is USS Long Island. Commissioned June 2, 1941. Built on a cargo ship hull. She displaces 7,800 tons. Measures 495 feet in length. Can barely make 16 knots. Her flight deck is a wooden platform bolted onto the merchant ship's structure. Her armor is non-existent. Her aircraft capacity is limited to 21 planes. Navy aviators call her a joke. The press dubs vessels like her baby Flattops. Crews invent their own nickname for the CVE designation. They claim it stands for combustible, vulnerable, and expendable. Everything about these ships violates the Navy's carrier doctrine developed over 2 decades. Fleet carriers like Enterprise displace 19,800 tons. Make 32 knots. Carry 90 aircraft. They're the queens of the Pacific. Armored. Fast. Powerful. The escort carriers are merchant ships with flight decks. Yet the Atlantic battle isn't being fought by fleet carriers. It's being lost in the mid-ocean gap, where convoys have no air support. Land-based aircraft from Newfoundland can cover the western approaches. British planes from Northern Ireland protect the eastern approaches. But in between lies 700 miles of empty ocean. U-boats own this space. The first escort carriers to reach the Atlantic are British vessels. HMS Audacity, converted from a German prize ship, begins operations in September 1941. Her aircraft drive off Focke-Wulf Condor bombers that have been shadowing convoys and calling in U-boats. In December 1941, Audacity's fighters shoot down 2 Condors and force 3 U-boats to break off attacks. Then use 751 torpedoes and sinks her. The Royal Navy has proven the concept works. They've also demonstrated the terrible vulnerability that makes American admirals hesitate. The United States Maritime Commission contracts with Seattle-Tacoma Shipbuilding to build C-3 type cargo ships for the merchant marine. These vessels use steam turbines that can drive them at 19 knots. Faster than the diesel-powered merchantmen converted earlier. When the Navy requisitions 20 hulls for carrier conversion, the Seattle-Tacoma yard has the advantage of modifying ships before completion, rather than converting finished vessels. The modifications are extensive but pragmatic. Workers cut away the cargo holds and upper deck. Then build a hangar deck inside the hull. 2 elevators connect the hangar to a 442-foot flight deck. A single hydraulic catapult assists aircraft launches. A small island structure built out over the starboard side keeps the flight deck clear. It houses the bridge and flight control. The ships retain their merchant marine profile below the flight deck. Vertical sides and a flat bottom that roll viciously in heavy seas. Armament is purely defensive. 2 5-inch guns. 1 forward, 1 aft. 8 twin-mounted 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns. 27 20mm Oerlikon cannons. This weaponry can defend against aircraft, but would be useless against any surface warship. Speed remains the ship's primary defense. And at 18 knots, they have precious little of that. The lead ship of the class, USS Bogue, is commissioned September 26, 1942. Captain Giles Short takes command of a vessel with a standard displacement of 8,390 tons. Fully loaded, she displaces 13,980 tons. Her crew of 890 men includes aviators from Composite Squadron 9, flying 12 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters and 9 Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. After shakedown operations reveal numerous mechanical problems, Bogue enters the yard for 2 months of repairs. When she finally sails for the Atlantic in February 1943, U-boat attacks have reached catastrophic levels. The Navy's operational plan for escort carriers calls for them to accompany convoys, providing continuous air coverage through the mid-Atlantic gap. Bogue makes her first 3 crossings in March and April 1943 using this doctrine. Her aircraft fly search patterns ahead of convoys looking for surface submarines. When they find U-boats, the submarines simply dive. The escorts lack weapons capable of attacking submerged targets effectively. The U-boats wait for the convoy to pass, then surface and attack from behind. In 3 crossings, Bogue's aircraft don't sink a single submarine. Navy critics point to this as proof the escort carriers are failures. Too slow to chase U-boats. Too small to carry enough aircraft for effective searches. Too vulnerable to risk in offensive operations. The Bureau of Aeronautics prepares a report recommending the escort carrier program be terminated after existing contracts are completed. Then Admiral Ernest King changes the doctrine. As Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, King has been watching the British develop hunter-killer tactics. Instead of tying escort carriers to convoy defense, the British are experimenting with independent groups that hunt U-boats in areas where intelligence indicates submarine activity. In May 1943, King orders American escort carriers to form hunter-killer groups that will operate independently from convoys. Bogue becomes the nucleus of the first American hunter-killer group. Accompanied by 4 destroyers, she departs Norfolk on April 22, 1943. Orders: seek out and destroy German submarines in the Central Atlantic. Her commander, Captain Short, has complete freedom to pursue any U-boat contact. Intelligence from HF/DF, high-frequency direction finding equipment, and from decoded Enigma messages will guide the group to areas of submarine concentration. The transformation from defensive convoy escort to offensive hunter begins immediately. May 21. While escorting convoy GS-24, Bogue's HF/DF operators detect radio transmissions from multiple U-boats. Wolfpack Mosul, consisting of 21 submarines, is gathering to attack the convoy. Lieutenant Commander Drain launches 5 Avengers to hunt the transmitting submarines. The aircraft catch U-231 on the surface. Recharging batteries. Depth charges damage the submarine's radio transmitters, forcing her to abort patrol and return to France. The next day brings the breakthrough that validates the entire escort carrier concept. Multiple Bogue aircraft execute 5 separate attacks on different submarines throughout the day. U-305 suffers moderate damage. U-569 takes catastrophic hits that force her crew to scuttle. This marks the first U-boat sunk by United States Navy escort carrier aircraft. More importantly, it demonstrates that hunter-killer groups can disrupt Wolfpack operations before they reach convoys. After delivering convoy GS-24 safely to Argentia on May 26, Bogue receives new orders. No more convoy escort. Pure hunter-killer operations. Intelligence will direct her group to submarine concentration areas. Her aircraft will saturate those areas with search patterns. Any U-boat found will be attacked with depth charges. Later with homing torpedoes. The hunter-killer offensive has begun. June 5, 1943. Bogue's aircraft find U-217 refueling from a submarine tanker in mid-Atlantic. The Avengers catch both submarines on the surface. Their depth charges send U-217 to the bottom with all hands. A week later, June 12, aircraft from Composite Squadron 9 locate U-118 attempting to charge batteries. The submarine crash dives. But too slowly. Depth charges rupture her pressure hull at 150 feet depth. She sinks with 49 crew members. July 23 brings 2 kills in a single day. Bogue's aircraft spots U-527 on the surface for her daily battery charge. Rockets and depth charges leave her crippled and sinking. 12 survivors are rescued by destroyer Clemson and transferred to Bogue as prisoners. On the same patrol, destroyer George E. Badger, part of Bogue's screen, gains sonar contact on U-613. Depth charges destroy the submarine before she can launch the mines she was carrying to American coastal waters. The pattern continues through summer and fall of 1943. Bogue's 8th patrol from November to December becomes her most successful. December 13th, U-172 is located through HF/DF intercepts. Aircraft from Bogue coordinate with 4 destroyers in a 27-hour running battle. The submarine twists and turns, dives and surfaces, but cannot escape. She finally goes down with 13 crew killed and 46 captured. December 20th completes the patrol with the sinking of U-850. In 6 weeks, this single escort carrier group has eliminated 3 German submarines. By the end of 1943, Bogue and her escorts have sunk 11 German U-boats, plus 2 Japanese submarines. No convoy lost a ship while under Bogue's protection. Not a single aircraft from Composite Squadron 9 was shot down by enemy action during the entire war. Her task group receives a Presidential Unit Citation for 6 of her 8 patrols, making her the most successful anti-submarine warfare carrier of World War II. The success isn't limited to one ship. USS Card, sister ship to Bogue, begins hunter-killer operations in August 1943. Her aircraft and escorts will sink 11 U-boats during the war. Wolf packs that gather to overwhelm convoy escorts discover that escort carriers can vector destroyers onto them before they can coordinate attacks. The hunters are becoming the hunted. May 24, 1943. Admiral Donitz sends an encrypted message to all U-boats. The losses are too heavy. All boats are to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes. Return to base areas. The wolf packs have been defeated. After 3 years and 8 months of nearly continuous success, the German submarine offensive has been broken in 3 weeks. The U-boat withdrawal marks the turning point in the Atlantic battle. But not its end. Donitz refuses to accept defeat. He commits German engineering and industrial resources to developing new submarine types that can operate submerged for extended periods. The Type XXI U-boat with improved batteries and streamlined hull can make 17 knots underwater, faster than most Allied escort ships. If deployed in sufficient numbers, these revolutionary submarines might regain the advantage. Meanwhile, escort carrier construction accelerates. Henry Kaiser's shipyards at Vancouver, Washington, begin producing Casablanca-class carriers at an extraordinary rate. Kaiser is an industrialist with no shipbuilding experience before the war. He's revolutionized ship construction by applying mass production techniques from automobile manufacturing and construction engineering. These purpose-built escort carriers, constructed from the keel up rather than converted from merchant hulls, incorporate lessons learned from earlier classes. Kaiser's yards use prefabricated sections built in enormous assembly buildings. Workers weld together hull sections, deckhouse modules, and machinery spaces inland. Then transport the completed assemblies to the building ways. This modular construction dramatically reduces build times. The first Casablanca-class carriers require 8 months from keel laying to commissioning. By mid-production run, Kaiser's workers have reduced this to 3.5 months. Welding crews work 3 shifts around the clock. Women, many with no prior industrial experience, operate welding equipment alongside experienced shipwrights. The yards employ orchestrated construction sequences where multiple teams work simultaneously on different sections of each ship. 50 Casablanca-class ships are ordered on June 18, 1942. The first, USS Casablanca herself, is commissioned July 8, 1943. The 50th ship, USS Munda, is completed exactly 1 year later, July 8, 1944. This represents an average commissioning rate of 1 carrier every 7.3 days. At peak efficiency, Kaiser's yards are launching completed escort carriers faster than some shipyards can build destroyers. The ships emerge with improved stability, better aviation facilities, more reliable machinery than the converted merchantman. Each carrier displaces 7,800 tons, makes 19 knots, operates 28 aircraft. While still slow and vulnerable by fleet carrier standards, they prove perfectly adequate for anti-submarine work. The hunter-killer offensive continues with increased intensity through 1944. The tactics that make escort carrier groups so deadly evolve through combat experience. Aircraft from Composite Squadron 9 and other carrier air groups perfect the coordination between visual search, radar detection, and attack procedures. The Grumman TBF Avenger proves ideal for anti-submarine warfare. The aircraft can carry depth charges, acoustic homing torpedoes, or rockets depending on the tactical situation. Its long range allows extended patrols far from the carrier. Its robust construction lets it operate in weather that grounds lighter aircraft. The Avenger's 3-man crew provides redundancy: pilot, radio man, and turret gunner, each trained to take over if one is incapacitated. Depth charges remain the primary weapon through 1943. Mark 24 acoustic homing torpedoes, introduced in early 1944, revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. These weapons, nicknamed Fido by their operators, can home on the sound of a submarine's propellers. Once dropped near a diving U-boat, the torpedo circles until it detects engine noise, then tracks the submarine automatically. U-boat commanders discover that their previous tactic of crash diving no longer guarantees escape. The noise of their diving procedures attracts the very weapons they're trying to evade. Escort carrier groups develop elaborate search patterns that cover vast ocean areas. Aircraft fly sector searches. Each plane assigned a specific area to patrol. When one aircraft detects a submarine, the carrier vectors additional aircraft to the contact while destroyers race to the location. The submarine finds itself facing attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Surface ships force the boat to stay submerged while aircraft wait overhead for any attempt to surface. This coordinated pressure can continue for hours or days until the submarine's batteries die or its crew surrenders. In October 1944, Admiral Francis Lowe, Chief of Staff of the 10th Fleet, writes in a memo to Admiral King that escort carrier support groups account for approximately 60% of all U-boats sunk by United States forces in the Atlantic and Mediterranean during the 6 months from April through September. This extraordinary success ratio demonstrates how completely these converted merchantmen have transformed naval aviation doctrine. The hunter-killer groups have become more effective than land-based patrol aircraft, despite operating from ships that Navy leadership had initially rejected. Beyond their combat success, escort carriers prove their worth in ways the early skeptics never imagined. They serve as aircraft ferries, carrying planes from American factories to combat zones. USS Bogue makes several trips to Glasgow, Scotland, transporting Army Air Force fighters. These missions free fleet carriers for combat operations in the Pacific. Escort carriers provide air cover for amphibious landings. Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa in November 1942, employs 4 escort carriers among its support forces. Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France in August 1944, uses 2 escort carriers to provide close air support. The slow converted merchantmen can loiter near invasion beaches. Their aircraft on call for immediate support missions that faster fleet carriers cannot provide. They serve as training platforms for replacement pilots transitioning to carrier operations. USS Charger spends the entire war operating off the East Coast, qualifying thousands of naval aviators and carrier landings before they deploy to combat zones. This training role prevents fleet carriers from being diverted from combat operations for pilot qualification. Most critically, escort carriers vindicate President Roosevelt's strategic vision. The president had grasped that winning the Atlantic battle required closing the air gap. Land-based aircraft couldn't reach mid-ocean. Fleet carriers were too valuable and too few to tie down on convoy escort. Escort carriers offered the only solution. Cheap enough to build in quantity. Capable enough to operate aircraft effectively. Available in sufficient numbers to provide continuous coverage. The numbers tell the story of American industrial response to crisis. Of the 151 aircraft carriers built by the United States during World War II, 122 are escort carriers. Approximately 80 are commissioned in the United States Navy during wartime. Another 38 are delivered to Britain under Lend-Lease. Production peaks in 1944 when American yards complete 47 escort carriers. This avalanche of hulls overwhelms the U-boat threat through sheer numbers. By the end of 1944, only 6 American escort carriers remain assigned to Atlantic anti-submarine operations. The others have been sent to the Pacific, where they'll prove equally valuable in a completely different role. The Atlantic has been won. The hunters have become prey. The cost has been significant. 6 American escort carriers are lost to enemy action during the war. USS Liscum Bay is torpedoed by Japanese submarine I-175 off the Gilbert Islands on November 24, 1943. The torpedo detonates the ship's bomb magazine. She sinks in 23 minutes with the loss of 644 men. USS Block Island goes down to U-549 in the Atlantic. 4 more escort carriers will be sunk in the Pacific theater. But measured against their impact, the cost is acceptable. By war's end, 11 American Atlantic escort carrier task groups have sunk 53 German submarines. This includes the most remarkable achievement in anti-submarine warfare during World War II. The capture of U-505. Intact. June 4, 1944. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding officer of escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, has been planning this operation for months. His task group has practiced boarding procedures repeatedly. When destroyers detect U-505 submerged approximately 150 miles off Spanish Sahara, Gallery orders a relentless depth charge attack. The submarine, unable to escape and running out of battery power, surfaces after 8 hours of pursuit. As U-505 breaks surface, her crew begins abandoning ship. They assume the Americans will sink their boat with gunfire. Standard procedure in submarine warfare. But Gallery has ordered his ships to hold fire. As the German crew swims away from their submarine, a boarding party led by Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David transfers from destroyer USS Pillsbury in a whaleboat. David and 8 men climb aboard the abandoned submarine, expecting demolition charges to detonate at any moment. They find the boat intact. Scuttling charges have been set, but haven't fired yet. The boarding party disables the charges, closes valves to stop flooding, secures the submarine. It's the first enemy vessel captured at sea by the United States Navy since the War of 1812. U-505 yields intelligence treasures. Her Enigma machine and codebooks provide cryptographers with insights into German naval communications. Her acoustic torpedoes give Allied scientists examples of weapons they've only encountered in combat. Her charts reveal U-boat patrol routes and operational procedures. The capture remains classified throughout the war, to prevent Germans from changing their codes and procedures. U-505 is now permanently displayed at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, a National Historic Landmark. Total U-boat losses to escort carrier groups represent a fraction of the 785 German submarines lost during the war. But the impact far exceeds the raw numbers. Escort carrier groups force U-boats to remain submerged for extended periods, limiting their effectiveness. They prevent submarine concentration in wolf packs. They protect the convoys that carry 15 million tons of supplies to Britain during the critical period from May 1943 through June 1944. Perhaps most significantly, escort carriers destroyed the mythology that has surrounded submarine warfare since World War I. The idea that submarines are virtually undetectable, that they can strike with impunity from beneath the waves, that no defense exists against underwater attack. This mythology has dominated naval thinking for decades. Escort carriers prove that continuous air coverage can locate, track, and destroy submarines. They demonstrate that merchant hulls and commercial construction techniques can produce combat-effective warships in months rather than years. The transformation of naval doctrine proceeds rapidly. By late 1944, the Navy has integrated escort carriers into all aspects of naval operations. They serve with fleet carrier task forces as replenishment ships, flying replacement aircraft to combat carriers. They provide anti-submarine screens for battleship groups and cruiser task forces. They accompany amphibious assault forces, offering close air support that fleet carriers cannot provide while remaining far enough offshore to avoid coastal defenses. In the Pacific, escort carriers become essential to the island-hopping campaign. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, 6 escort carriers of Taffy III encountered the Japanese center force. 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, 11 destroyers, closing to attack the invasion beaches. The engagement begins at 06:48 hours when lookouts aboard USS Fanshawe Base spot pagoda masts on the horizon. Within minutes, 18-inch shells from battleship Yamato begin falling around the escort carriers. Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy III, faces an impossible situation. His 6 escort carriers and 7 escorts are outgunned, outranged, vastly slower than the approaching Japanese force. The nearest American fleet carriers are over 100 miles away. The invasion beaches, packed with vulnerable transports and landing craft, lie directly behind his formation. If the Japanese break through, thousands of American soldiers will be slaughtered. Sprague orders his carriers to launch every aircraft they have, regardless of armament. Torpedo bombers carry depth charges intended for submarine hunting. Fighters are armed with machine guns and small bombs meant for ground support. Some aircraft launch with no weapons at all, making dry runs to distract Japanese gunners. The escort carriers turn east into the wind for flight operations, and run at maximum speed toward a rain squall that might provide temporary concealment. For 2.5 hours, the converted merchantmen dodge shells from battleship main batteries while their aircraft attack the vastly superior Japanese force. Destroyers and destroyer escorts charge the Japanese line, launching torpedoes and firing their 5-inch guns at battleships and cruisers. The escorts are annihilated one by one, but their sacrifice buys time. Japanese Admiral Takeo Kurita, confused by the ferocity of the defense and convinced by radio intercepts that he faces fleet carriers, breaks off his attack and withdraws at 09:25 hours. The cost has been severe. USS Gambier Bay is hit repeatedly by Japanese cruisers. Shells tear through her unarmored hull. She loses power, lists, capsizes, sinks with 147 crew members. USS St. Louis survives the surface action only to be hit at 10:51 hours by the first organized kamikaze attack of the war. A Mitsubishi Zero, possibly piloted by Lieutenant Yukio Seiki, crashes through her flight deck and detonates in the hangar among fueled and armed aircraft. Secondary explosions tear the ship apart. She sinks 30 minutes later with 113 killed. Yet the remaining 4 escort carriers of Taffy III escape. The Battle of Samar demonstrates both the terrible vulnerability of escort carriers and their unexpected resilience. These ships, designed for submarine hunting and convoy escort, have stood toe-to-toe with battleships and survived. Their sacrifice saves the Leyte invasion force from annihilation. Naval historians will call it the most gallant action in United States Navy history. Postwar analysis reveals the full scope of escort carrier impact. Research conducted by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concludes that escort carriers were instrumental in defeating the U-boat offensive. Without continuous air coverage in the mid-Atlantic gap, convoy losses would have remained unsustainable. Britain might have been forced to reduce imports below survival levels. The build-up for D-Day, which requires transporting millions of tons of supplies across the Atlantic, could have been delayed or cancelled. Every division that lands in Normandy has crossed the ocean under the protection of escort carrier groups. German naval records captured after the war show that Admiral Dönitz considered the escort carrier threat existential to U-boat operations. In his memoirs, Dönitz writes that the appearance of American escort carriers in the spring of 1943 forced a complete reconsideration of submarine tactics. Surfacing became impossible in areas where carrier groups operated. Battery charging had to be done at periscope depth at night under constant aircraft threat. Transit times increased dramatically as U-boats crept submerged through carrier patrol areas, burning precious battery power to avoid detection. The psychological toll on U-boat crews is severe. Submarines that had once surfaced freely to run on diesel engines are now confined underwater for days at a time. Crews suffer from carbon dioxide poisoning as air quality deteriorates. Battery cells fail from overuse. Navigation becomes guesswork when submarines can't surface to take star sights. Morale collapses as boats return from patrols without sinking a single ship. By late 1943, veteran U-boat commanders are requesting transfer to surface ships. New crews require extensive psychological conditioning before their first patrol. Dönitz has pinned his hopes on Type XXI submarines that can outrun aircraft while submerged. These revolutionary boats with streamlined hulls and massive battery banks represent a technological leap forward. They can make 17 knots underwater, faster than most escort ships and fast enough to outrun depth charges. They can remain submerged for extended periods, eliminating the vulnerability that escort carriers exploit. But these revolutionary boats enter service too late and in too few numbers to affect the war's outcome. Production delays and bombing of construction yards limit completed hulls to 118 by war's end. Only 4 Type XXIs make operational patrols before Germany surrenders. None encounter American escort carriers in combat. For the crews who serve aboard escort carriers, the war is an experience of extreme contrasts. Living conditions are cramped beyond anything fleet carrier sailors know. The converted merchant ships lack the amenities designed into purpose-built warships. Ventilation is inadequate in tropical waters and freezing in North Atlantic storms. Berthing spaces are crowded with bunks stacked 3 high. The ships roll viciously in Atlantic storms, their flat bottoms and high topsides creating maximum leverage for ocean swells. Sailors joke that escort carriers would roll on wet grass. The flight deck crews work under conditions that would be considered impossible on fleet carriers. They service aircraft in weather that fleet carriers would suspend operations. They launch and recover planes in seas that toss the small carriers like corks. They arm torpedoes and depth charges while standing on decks pitching 30 degrees. Everything is harder, colder, wetter, more dangerous than on the big carriers. The pilots face unique challenges. The short flight decks leave no margin for error on landing. An Avenger has to catch one of 8 arresting wires stretched across a 442-foot deck, while landing on a ship that might be rolling 15 degrees. Miss all the wires and crash barriers offer the only chance to avoid going over the bow into the ocean. Yet Composite Squadron 9 pilots make thousands of landings without losing a single aircraft to enemy action. The men who fly from escort carrier decks develop intense pride in their vessels. They know their ships are underpowered, underarmed, underprotected. They call them Kaiser coffins and Jeep carriers. They refer to the CVE designation as combustible, vulnerable, and expendable. But they also know their ships have changed the course of the war. A pilot from Composite Squadron 9, interviewed decades later, says simply, "We flew from a merchant ship with a flight deck nailed on top.